And welcome back, everyone. Going to be about an hour, 10-minute show today, so there won't be any topics to lean us in. We're just going to get started and talk about my SEC record predictions, some specific predictions for Georgia, Texas, Tennessee, and then at the very end, I will go through and I will answer your questions, some questions that you've submitted to me, 4 of them specifically. One about Michigan State and Jonathan Smith's job security, one about Ohio State's path to winning the national championship, another about how many wins each Big Ten team needs to be in the at-large college football playoff discussion, which honestly that one's pretty bland because, if you go 12-0, no matter who you are in the Power 4 you get in, it's whether or not you need 9, 10, or 11 wins. And then once we move to the 16-team model, it'll be whether you need 8, 9, or 10 wins to get into that conversation. Also, I'm talking a little bit about USC recruiting too, and answering a question someone posited to me about how real or how fake is USC recruiting. Again, make sure to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, do the things that the little video on the screen is telling you to do. Like, subscribe, hit the bell, show support through a super chat if you want to, or a super thanks in the comment section after this is live. I appreciate you all for tuning in. Let's do this. And because I didn't go live Tuesday, I said I'd go live Tuesday or Thursday in addition to Wednesday today. I will be going live tomorrow as well. Time to be determined. Could be 6, could be earlier than 6, could be 7, could even be 8. It'll be a longer show, definitely 2 hours, could even be longer than that. Be a really long show to send us off into the weekend. But let's dive in. Let's get to it right here. And I want to talk about a few things, and to first and foremost start off with the SEC predictions. I want to talk about my SEC predictions, both regular season and postseason predictions. That is what I want to talk about here first. The SEC has not won the national championship for the past 2 seasons, but I still think that they are the best conference in America. And it's a very interesting conference to look at. The SEC is the deepest conference in America, and you see that reflected in its preseason win totals, where no one is over 9.5 wins. Not even Texas, not even Georgia, not Alabama. There's a lot of possibilities to go 9-3 in the SEC conference. The SEC is the deepest. The SEC, I'm tripping over myself here. The SEC is the deepest conference in America, and I want to talk about it and give you my regular season predictions for all 16 of their teams, and also talk about my postseason predictions for them and kind of blend them together to give you an idea of what I think about the SEC as a whole, their top-end teams, their lower-end teams. Of course, we'll talk more about the top-end teams because that's where most of the meat is to this whole ordeal, but we'll talk about Mississippi State, Kentucky, Vanderbilt. They have some good players on their schools. And then, of course, the SEC, it's been a minute since they've been to the national championship game, but they have several playoff contenders, and I would say the odds support the concept that they will eventually win the national championship again, or at least compete for one in a better way than they did in 2023 or 2024, where they didn't even reach the national championship game. So let's dive in and discover how I believe the SEC will shake out in the regular season and postseason for this fall. The SEC, when I look at them, I think devolves into a few tiers. Now, these tiers aren't as separate as they are, I believe, in the ACC or the SEC, or not the SEC, but the ACC, SEC of old. Let's do that. And then also the Big Ten. The reason I said SEC there is because, A, they're on my mind because that's what we're talking about in this segment, but B, they used to be much more divided, the teams in the SEC did. There used to be a very clear hierarchy of it's Georgia, it's Alabama, maybe sometimes you get LSU or Auburn popping in, but in the Nick Saban era, and especially in the Nick Saban era where Kirby Smart was at Georgia, that was the presumed top tier and everyone else was way below that, there was always conversation about, well, maybe Jimbo Fisher and A&M can step in. Just never happened, was never going to happen. There was conversation at times with Florida and Dan Mullen. He just didn't recruit at the level he needed to consistently be at Georgia's level. They had that 1 year in 2020, and even then at the end of the year, Georgia may have been the better team and just had to figure some things out that Florida already had figured out at the beginning. Now, Georgia almost lost 3 or 4 games last year. Texas had the easiest schedule in the SEC, and Georgia kicked their rear, and SEC teams did an okay job competing with them at different points. Texas A&M was, I don't know, a combined 14, 21 points away from going to Atlanta between the Auburn and the Texas game. Auburn lost a bunch of close games. Oklahoma lost a bunch of close games. All of Alabama's losses outside of the one to Oklahoma were close, and that Oklahoma game wasn't close because of the amount of just bad errant throws that Jalen Milroe made. The conference was fun to watch last year. I think it was, and I'm a guy from the Big Ten. My school's a Big Ten school. I root for Big Ten teams much of the time. I'm a Northern guy telling you that the SEC last year was probably the most entertaining conference to watch because of the night games while the Big Ten saddled with Big Noon. And then there's just all this competition here. I know my predictions have been up on the screen, but you can probably see for yourself that I believe in what I'm saying because I'm picking 5 schools to go 9-4. And then if you include the 8-5 schools, well, that extends to 7. Nearly half the league, I think, is going to finish regular season and especially the postseason with 8 or 9 wins. This is going to be a league with a lot of parity. I think similar to the Big 12. The difference is the average SEC school is far above and beyond the average Big 12 school in the same way the average Big 10 school is far and above the ACC school. But those are the sister conferences because how they're set up is similar. The ACC, especially if you include Notre Dame, has really 3 really good national championship caliber teams, and then everyone else is hunting to get into the playoffs. Of course, you have, Georgia Tech occupying that 4th spot in odds, similar to the Big Ten where you have Oregon, Penn State, and Ohio State, and then Michigan's occupying the 4th spot, and USC's trailing them close. It's not that way in the SEC. The SEC has the parity of the Big 12 with the talent and resources and passion of the old SEC. You don't quite have the coaching because Saban isn't there, but there's a lot of great programs, a lot of great football. I think that to really segue into this, Arkansas goes 2-10, 0-8 in SEC play, and I don't want to spend too much time on them because I think they're dead. I think it's a dead program. For now, not saying it'll be that way forever, and it would be fun to see Arkansas have success again. I'm a very young guy. I'm only in my 20s, but going back and watching some highlights of those Bobby Petrino Arkansas teams where they were gritty, they were tough, hard-hitting, physical, and they knew how to play offense, and they had good defenses too. I miss that type of team. Arkansas has nothing like that right now. They got pillaged in the portal. They bring back Taylon Green. They have some other players, but I don't want to spend too much time talking about it because when Josh Pate, who's as connected to the SEC as anyone is, when his first thought about Arkansas, when he's asked about them, is to sigh and say, I don't know. Sell everything you have. It's not a good sign. Kentucky is similar. I have them 3-9, 0-8 in SEC play too. I think that while there is a lot of parity, when you have a league that's this tough and the SEC likes to play tough non-conference games, whether it's due to the, typically SEC, ACC rivalries that occur on a yearly basis, South Carolina, Clemson, Kentucky, Louisville, for example, and Florida, Florida State, someone has to collect the L's. It's what I said about Iowa in my Big Ten predictions segment, which the link to that's in the top right corner of your screen right now, or at the beginning of the video. I'll put it there somewhere. Someone has to take the L's. And in the SEC, it's not going to be someone, it's going to be someone's because the schedules are tougher. And I think that is Kentucky. I think it's Arkansas. Now, Kentucky has some nice players, I think especially on the offensive line. They got Joshua Braun from Arkansas, Evan Wibberly, Jalen Farmer, Alex Wolschlager, Shiza Pete. I like their offensive line, actually. And I know they got Zach Calzada, who played for Texas A&M and then transferred to Auburn back in 2021 and 2022. Had 2 nice years at Incarnate Word. But besides that, maybe some players in their secondary, I think that the only thing holding Mark Stoops in Kentucky is that lovely, massive buyout. Mississippi State I have going 3-9, 1-7 in SEC play. And that's basically because, well, I think Arkansas is going to quit in the middle of the year. Those 3 teams definitely make up your bottom tier, for sure. That is your bottom feeder tier. Mississippi State, Kentucky, and Arkansas. They can maybe earn a few conference wins, but they're not going better than 6-6. They're not. I mean, 6-6 is their absolute ceiling, if not 5-7 or lower for some of those programs, especially I think for Mississippi State, based on the quality of team they were in 2024. I have Vanderbilt going bowling yet again, 6-6, 2-6 in the regular season, and then in the postseason, I have Vanderbilt competing in the Game Above Sports Bowl, which typically a Big Ten team goes to, but I have enough Big Ten teams making the playoff and enough finishing with losing records where I don't think a Big Ten team will get in. So Vanderbilt just popped up in my bowl projections. They're going to play a MAC team. I happen to think it's Bowling Green. That is if they make the First Responders Bowl, and I just had enough SEC teams. Oh, crap. I got all the way through this segment, and I just realized, people are going to be mad. I got all the way through this segment. I realized I didn't finish the edit. What a shame. I didn't finish the win-loss, and you know, postseason explanation as to who was going to make the playoff and what record they were going to have in the playoff. Shoot. Gosh darn it. Oh, well. Yeah, I'll round out this segment, but then I'll redo this tomorrow so I can actually like make a segment out of it. So I didn't finish it, but yeah, Kentucky, Mississippi State, Arkansas is my bottom feeder tier. LSU's at 7-6 because I think they're going to lose enough games in the regular season to where Brian Kelly gets fired. That's kind of my thought process behind that. I don't think Kelly's going to survive the year. I like what they did in the portal, but the problem with the SEC that I feel like a lot of these objective analysts or just analysts in general don't get is, again, someone has to collect the L's. You can't pick, LSU, Florida, Oklahoma, and Auburn. Not all of those coaches are going to survive the season. One, if not 2 of them, are probably going to get fired. And I think that Kelly is the surefirest one of them all because LSU has the highest expectations. If you're Florida, Auburn, and I would even say Oklahoma, just getting to 7 wins might save you your job, regular season-wise. 8 will certainly do it for any of those programs. If LSU doesn't get 10, Kelly either enters 2026 on a hot seat that is so hot if he loses 2 games before November, he's done, or he's fired at the end of the year. Like if LSU goes 8-4 regular season as they did last year, Kelly's gone. He's fired. He's out the window. His seat is hotter than anyone's seat right now. So that's my logic behind LSU. And then you got South Carolina. I like Lenora Sellers, so that's why I have South Carolina in the position they are, despite how much they lose. I think their roster is more of a 6-6 caliber roster, maybe even 5-7, but that's when you take every position at an equal face value, and you can't do that because QB is that important. I think Sellers is the second best quarterback in the country, and therefore I think that South Carolina is going to find a way to win a game or 2 or even 3 they maybe shouldn't win. You look at Florida. Florida's a very complete roster. Their schedule's just tough, so I have them going 8-5 again. Oklahoma, I think, is a pretty complete roster, an elite one on defense, just complete enough on offense. Their schedule's tough, but I think their home and away games and just everything aligns a little bit better than Florida's. I think quality-wise, it's a tougher schedule than Florida's, but I think the way Oklahoma's staff and roster's constructed and the home and away games they have just line up for Oklahoma to get an extra regular season win than Florida. For Missouri, I think they're going to lose some close games. They're going to win some close games, but their schedule's even easier than it was last year. And then for Ole Miss, easy schedule, so they lose a lot, but honestly, with how many close games they lost last year and the potential that team had, regression could mean holding the same exact record and just getting blown out by Georgia on the road instead of blowing them out at home. For Tennessee, easy schedule like Ole Miss, and with the roster Heupel is built, I think that the ceiling is low, but the floor is high. Alabama is a playoff contender who I think, because their assistant staff has a lot of subpar coaching and their recent development and even recruiting, I think, has been a little bit overrated, they're going to lose 3 games again. Georgia on the road, I will not pick someone again to go into Sanford Stadium and win, as I've done too many times over recent history. I will not pick Alabama to, just with what they showed me last year. I don't know if they'll go into South Carolina and come out with a win against that quarterback, and then I think they find another way to lose another game. Again, not very in-depth analysis here, but that's because I have limited time on my hands, and this is not a complete graphic. It's close to complete. You guys may think it's complete and that I'm being a perfectionist, but I need to include the CFP records, show a graphic to match my Big Ten predictions, one that Georgia wins the conference and Texas is the runner-up. And yeah, and Auburn is my surprise team. I think that Auburn, with how they've constructed their roster, matches up well with a lot of teams. I think that they're going to win at least one of those Alabama or Georgia games at home. And then A&M, Texas, and Georgia, I all have making the playoffs. A&M at 10-2, Texas at 11-2, Georgia at 11-2. I think this conference once again kind of cannibalizes itself. I actually have Georgia going to the national championship game. I have them playing Penn State. I have them losing to Penn State, but I have them going there and playing Penn State. And then I have Texas going to the semifinals and dropping a game there. So 2 SEC teams in the semifinals, that's +1 from last year, and then an SEC team in the Natty, that's +1 from last year as well. So I think this is a very deep conference. My only issue at this point with the SEC is that it will cannibalize each other, and that with the tough schedules, you're going to see some teams just get smothered with injuries again, and then that will affect their quality of play. That's what happened to Georgia last year. If Georgia plays an easier schedule, they probably get a either more favorable playoff picture, or because they're not facing the same amount of athletes and their starters therefore can get more rest, they don't get as many injuries, and they'd probably be a little bit of a better team if they played an easier schedule last year. I think to a certain degree that will happen with a lot of these SEC teams again. I don't think it'll happen to Georgia again. They had bad injury luck on top of the tough schedule. Their schedule gets easier, and I think Georgia regressing to the mean means they improve compared to last year. Texas's schedule is still pretty easy. It's tougher in the non-conference, but I mean, they're facing 2025 Ohio State, not 2024 Ohio State. So it's not like they're facing this impossible Goliath in week 1. And then they could get, 5 teams in. I'm picking them to get 3, but Alabama could easily get in. Tennessee with the QB limitation, I don't think they're getting in. I'd hard cap them at 9 wins because I don't think you'll beat Georgia or Alabama, and you could mess up against Oklahoma or Florida. Florida could make the playoffs, or Oklahoma or Auburn. If any of those teams go 9-3 regular season, those are playoff contenders with those schedules. LSU could reach the playoffs. I could see them going 10-2 or even 11-1 with that schedule, depending on how Bama pans out, depending on how Clemson pans out. A lot of opportunity here. Also, I do think Sam Pittman and Brian Kelly get fired. Mark Stoops could as well. So at least an eighth, if not more, of the SEC coaches are changing from 2024 to 2025. My apologies yet again about that edit not being complete. It'll be showcased tomorrow. So let me just quickly change that on my show plans. I try to be organized. Doesn't mean I always am, but let me move that right there. At least it's mostly done. mostly done. Okay, let's talk about Georgia, though. I want to talk about my Georgia Bulldogs 2025 record prediction, what they were a little bit in 2024, and then in particular, I want to discuss some of my picks for them and my record prediction for them. I think they're going to get better, as I already alluded to, but for those only watching the segment when it's clipped and released on YouTube, you won't exactly know that. So, let's get to it. I want to give you my Georgia Bulldogs record prediction for 2025 and discuss the reigning SEC champions. Can they get back to that point? Can they win a playoff game this year as they won the SEC, laid an egg in that Sugar Bowl against Notre Dame, where I thought they were winning the line of scrimmage. I thought that at points they looked like the better team, but then Notre Dame did two things they were good at: winning the turnover battle and being explosive on special teams with their underrated athleticism. And that ultimately took the game away, took it out of Georgia's hands. And with the limitations at quarterback and the injuries, they just couldn't do much once they were down by 2 scores. But Georgia went 11-3, 6-2 last year, played maybe the toughest schedule in college football history. And they won the SEC with all those injuries and all those limitations, and Carson Beck having a really questionable year, and a year that I think wasn't foreseen, a year that many didn't expect. Many, including myself, expected him to be a Heisman caliber quarterback, or at least a Heisman contender caliber quarterback, top 10, top 5. He finished top 10 in QBR, but that's because the schedule he played against and the fact that he is talented. There were many points of the year where he was not even playing as a top 25 quarterback. Before we move on and talk more about 2025 Georgia, not just reflecting on 2024, I want to give this awesome stat. I keep saying it, but it's awesome, so I feel like it's worthy of repetition. There were 3 games last year where Carson Beck threw 3 interceptions, and Georgia won 2 of them by double digits. That was Florida neutral field, that was Texas in Austin, and one of them against Alabama on the road, they lost by 1 score. It's just insane coaching. And that's, I think, where I can only start off a Georgia Bulldogs record prediction video, is talking about how I think Kirby Smart is the best head coach in America. I think Georgia's staff is a huge plus. It's a top 3 staff in America, and it may not be number 3 or number 2, especially if you're going to give a lot of weight to the head coach. And you should give more weight to the head coach than the coordinators or any other assistant. Staff is an area I lean very positively with Georgia. I've heard people talk about how, this is a put up or shut up year with Kirby. It doesn't make sense. They won the SEC. They played a super tough schedule. If they beat Notre Dame, who's to say they wouldn't have found a way to beat Penn State? And then with the talent they have and some more time for their players, I mean, as crazy as it sounds, to maybe get a little bit healthy during the playoff, maybe they could have completed the comeback against Ohio State that Notre Dame failed to do. And Notre Dame almost did that. The point being, they were just on the wrong side of that Sugar Bowl game. They were on the wrong side of the close wins phenomena. Notre Dame won that game close. They won the Penn State game close. They won some more games in the regular season close. They were good at that. Georgia was not exactly good at that. They did it against Georgia Tech. They pulled away from Tennessee late, but they did lose to Alabama competitively, and they may have lost to Florida competitively if DJ Lagway didn't have to scramble around for his life. So it was a very up and down year for Georgia, but I love what they bring back and also what is stepping up for them. I'm not worried about Gunnar Stockton. I'll make a video about that, so you should hit the notification bell, as I've already told you probably by now in my subscribe segment. But I'm not worried about him. I have him on my All-SEC team. I have Nate Frazier and incoming transfer Josh McCray on my All-SEC team at running back. And my all-conference teams are larger than most, but only good players are still represented just because there are so many, especially in super conferences. You have more teams, especially in the SEC, where you added 2 blue bloods. You're going to have a plethora more good players than you did prior. And the SEC had just mountains of good players beforehand. I have Drew Bobo, Micah Morris, Daniel Calhoun, Monroe Freeling, and Ernest Green III, all projected starters on the O-line representing Georgia on my All-SEC teams at center, guard, and tackle. I have 4 Georgia wide receivers on my SEC teams. Again, larger than most, but Zachariah Branch, Dylan Bell, Colby Young, and Noah Thomas, I think will be Georgia's deepest wide receiver room in several years. I like Oscar Delpin, Loskin Lucky at tight end, Christian Miller, Jordan Hall, Xavier McLeod at D tackle. They're on my All-SEC team. I think Christian Miller will be the best D tackle in the SEC. Gabe Harris, Elo Madozi, and Joseph Jonah Onyanwe, I have them at edge. Raylan Wilson, CJ Allen, and Chris Cole I have represented at linebacker. KJ Bolden and Jonah Laguero at safety, and Dalen Everett at corner. And then Georgia has the best punter and best kicker in the SEC in Peyton Woodring and Brett Thorson. Lethal special teams unit, lethal defense, lethal line of scrimmage play if the recruiting and development that we've seen previously from Georgia pans out. The questions are quarterback and defensive back, and I would say running back a little bit too. I lean positive at running back, very positive. Lean negative at quarterback in the sense that I don't think he'll be Carson Beck or Stetson Bennett, and that's been the standard at Georgia at quarterback recently, is top 10 in QBR, a top 15 quarterback overall for the most part, and I don't think that Stockton will be that. But I don't think he'll be this disaster either, as some, I believe, think. When looking at this schedule here, Georgia's minus 265 odds to reach the playoff, plus 290 to win the SEC. Marshall in week 1, Austin Peay week 2, at Tennessee week 3, get a bye in week 4, and off that bye they host Alabama in week 5. Week 6 they play Kentucky at home. 7 they travel to Auburn. 8 they play Ole Miss at home. They get a bye week 9 before hosting Florida. Well, not hosting, but neutral field against Florida. Week 10, at Mississippi State. Week 11, hosting Texas. Week 12, that'll be a really exciting game and definitely at night. Week 3, they play Charlotte. And they play Georgia Tech, also neutral field, in Week 14. I think that there's a world maybe where they go 12-0, the schedule's just tough enough. There are enough, tough road games, tough home games to where I think that 11-1 is the realistic ceiling, and 8-4 is their floor, and that's realistic with all they lose, the amount of close games they won last year, and the fact that, again, it's a tough schedule, and even the best recruiting programs sometimes bust on entire classes or bust at certain points or just caught with their pants down. Georgia loses player after player after player every year. I mean, last year was the first year in a while they had over 60% returning production. So on one hand, they could totally reload, but some things could also bite them in the butt. I think that they have the 6th toughest SEC schedule. 6th toughest, only looking at conference games, so not factoring in Georgia Tech, Charlotte, Austin Peay, or Marshall. Key games for them are Alabama at home, Florida neutral field, Texas at home, and Georgia Tech. Technically road game in a sense, but it's neutral field in terms of location. I think that them getting all of their biggest games from my standpoint, either neutral field or at home, outside of maybe Auburn on the road. With Tennessee, it's early enough and Tennessee loses enough to where I think, hint, hint, Georgia should win comfortably there. That helps Georgia out a lot to have those games in favorable locations. They bring back 46% of their production, with a S&P Plus rating of a 26.4, which is 5th in the preseason per Bill Connolly. My prediction for Georgia is 11-2, 7-1 in SEC play. I think they're going to be tied for first in the SEC, and they will win the SEC. They will win the SEC over Texas. So they'll either go 1-1 against Texas, or I think more likely 2-0 against Texas. Texas matches up better with Georgia than they did last season, but they have to travel to Sanford, and I love Kirby Smart over Steve Sarkisian in the head coaching chess matchup. Absolutely love that. Georgia as the SEC champions would definitely get a first-round bye with 11 wins, playing that schedule, winning the SEC. It would definitely, certainly get a first-round bye. And I think that people, and this is a tangent I don't want to spend more than a few seconds on, the reason the teams that received the bye last year went 0-4 was because all the teams that received a bye were either worse than their opponent or of similar caliber. Georgia was the only one of similar caliber to their opponent. Them and Notre Dame, I think, were very similar last year in terms of overall quality of team. Notre Dame was more consistent, but Georgia, with the talent and the coaching, I think had a higher ceiling, but also a much lower floor. Ohio State was better than Oregon, and then Texas and Penn State were obviously better than Arizona State and Boise State, respectively. So I think with this new format where the highest ranked teams get a bye, I think you're going to see that narrative of, oh, the bye is actually a disadvantage. I think that will just become neutral. The bye could be a disadvantage for teams, but I think for a staff like Georgia's, it would be an advantage. Now I want to talk about some more specific predictions that I have for Georgia. Some answers, and giving more details about how I think the season will play out. So my mild prediction, which is just an easy one, a layup. We're using a Scoville scale here. I'm also going to give a medium, hot, scorching, and hellfire prediction, which is my hottest one. Georgia reaches the CFP for the 5th time under Kirby Smart. I mean, they're minus 290 odds to do so. I think it's pretty easy to say that. And then my medium prediction is, after a historically bad season running the football, Georgia will field the top 50 run offense. It's a little bit hotter only because of how bad the ground game was last year. They lose Trevor Etienne. Frazier has some questions. McCray does as well. And they lose a lot in the O-line. So they have questions everywhere in terms of being a competent rushing offense. But I think they're going to break through and do well there. My hot prediction: the Bulldogs win the SEC for the 2nd year in a row and for the 4th time overall under Kirby Smart. I think that their only real competitor, from my standpoint, or maybe competitors plural, is Texas, and depending on if Alabama proves me wrong with their O-line and staff, it would be Alabama. But those are the only two, and they host both of them regular season, and Alabama has a lot of landmine games. Texas has a few, and Georgia has a mental edge over Texas. Alabama also has a mental edge over Georgia, by the way, just to be fair in mentioning that. But what Georgia did to Texas last year was crazy, because Texas in power ratings was an equivalent team or a better team, and Georgia was physically pounding them. It was Texas's outside advantage that kept them in the game, in the SEC championship game, and within more than 3 touchdowns at home in Austin. So I think that Georgia has an advantage and just good odds to win the SEC again. But it's a hot prediction because there's a lot of competition and they're playing a tough schedule. My scorching prediction number 4, is that Georgia plays in the national championship, and therefore they improve as an overall team from 2024. Not by a lot, but slightly. And I think most of that will be in relationship to their floor. I don't think you'll see a meltdown like what happened against Notre Dame. I don't think you'll see a near loss to a 6-6, 7-5 caliber team like they had against Georgia Tech, although I know that's a rivalry. I just think that when they lose, it will be close, or it will be to good teams, not at home either. I think their home game win streak, that should have been a prediction I put in here, is that I think their win streak at home continues. I don't have them losing a home game they haven't lost a game at home since 2019, so they'll extend that streak for another year into 2026. And then my hellfire prediction is that Gunnar Stockton will be a top 25 quarterback. Not top 10, but top 25, at least in terms of the stats, the QBR, the efficiency. I think the receivers are good enough, the O-line's good enough, tight end is and running back is, to where he'll put up some good numbers, he won't make a ton of mistakes, and he'll just be a good QB. I don't think he'll be Bennett in 21 or 22 good. I don't think he'll be Carson Beck 23 good. But I think he'll be a lot like Carson Beck last year as an overall player. Higher floor, not as many bonehead decisions or mistakes. But he also won't have that wow ceiling that Beck has showcased at multiple points. I think that Georgia is underestimated. They're one of the most underestimated and underrated teams in college football right now. I genuinely believe that. I think that Georgia is going to have a great 2025 campaign. I'm excited to watch the Bulldogs under Kirby Smart. Don't underestimate them. I'm putting this as a reminder on my phone for the 2025 season. Don't underestimate Georgia. It will be your peril. You will only get hurt underestimating the Bulldogs. Now let's talk about Tennessee, then we'll do Texas, and then we'll do as many questions at the end as I have time for. The Tennessee Volunteers reached the college football playoff despite having a litany of offensive issues. They struggled to pass the ball. The receivers and former quarterback Nico Imaliava struggled to connect for the entirety of the 2024 season. And yet they put up good numbers on the ground. Their offensive line, which struggled to do a whole lot, if I'm being honest, was carried by Dylan Sampson, that running back room, and they had some good players up front like center Cooper Mays. And then that defense, they won games defensively in a way that really impressed me, where they almost beat Arkansas, scoring 14 points because their defense just kept holding Arkansas back. It was eventually too much, but the fact that they had some bad offensive games like that, or even the Alabama game, where they didn't score a single point in the first half, and then they come out and they win that game, and they were able to reach the college football playoff. It was impressive. It was a well-coached team by Josh Heupel and company. They went 10-3, 6-2, second in the SEC, didn't reach the championship game due to a tie-breaking loss with Georgia, and then they lost in the first round of the college football playoff in blowout fashion to Ohio State. In talking about Tennessee, I think it's important to realize and to have that reality check that you're not just going to reload from Nico Imaliava to Joey Aguilar. Now, Aguilar may put up similar numbers because Nico last year, the dirty secret was that he wasn't really all that good. But he has more natural talent than Aguilar. And Tennessee, well, they only returned 51% of their production, which is 81st, and their preseason S&P Plus rating is an 18.4, which is 13th per Bill Connolly, means they're viewed as 18.4 points better than the average college football team. The problem is, even with a schedule that I think in the SEC is very workable, that's just by SEC standards. It's still a pretty tough schedule from my perspective. So that, with breaking in a new quarterback, losing the majority of the defensive tackle core, having changes and a lot of youth at tackle, and that unit wasn't great last year, I think that Tennessee has a hard cap of 10, if not 9 wins. And I think the schedule explains that a bit. So Syracuse is a neutral field game in week 1. They'll be favored there. East Tennessee State, obviously that's a win. Georgia week 3. UAB week 4, at Mississippi State week 5, once again could be the worst SEC team. Week 6 they get a bye. Week 7 host Arkansas. 8 they play at Alabama. 9 they host Kentucky. 10 they host Oklahoma. Get a bye in week 11 before playing New Mexico State week 12, traveling to Florida week 13, and Vanderbilt at home week 14. So, I mean, when I look at Tennessee's schedule, it's a workable schedule. It is, like, again, by SEC standards, and it should show at Kentucky, not hosting Kentucky. They play at Kentucky in week 9, little correction there. In observing Tennessee's schedule, I think that wins against a team like Georgia or Alabama on the road are going to be very hard to come by. And then between Oklahoma and Florida on the road, maybe Arkansas if they bounce back, or Kentucky if they bounce back in a major way, or somehow Syracuse reloads, or Vanderbilt's returning production really gives their team a boost, I see Tennessee at least getting 2 losses. And even if they go 10-2 again and match last season's win total, I think as a team quality, as a roster, they will be worse. So I just want to establish that. And they could be as bad as a 500 team. They could go back to 2021, wouldn't be the same style. Their defense would be better, offense would be worse, but that's possible with the amount of changes they're going through. I have enough faith in Heupel and his culture and the roster to believe that realistically they're going to finish with at least a winning record, 7-5. They may just lose 5 SEC games, or maybe they start the year rough against Syracuse. I think this will be a team that gets better as the year goes on and starts off in a pretty rough way. I don't know. It's interesting to look at. I will get back to their roster, though, before getting to my official record prediction and tell you that I don't like quarterback at all. But I think Peyton Lewis and Deshaun Bishop are all SEC caliber running backs. I have them on my all SEC team. It's larger than most. I've said that in all my prediction videos just for context. I have Wendell Moore Jr. at guard. Same with Shamurad Omarov. Those are the two projected starting guards last time I checked. I have Mike Matthews actually breaking out for Tennessee in a major way at wide receiver. 5-star recruit they got 2 cycles ago. Miles Kitzelman at tight end is going to be a beast. And I think that Joshua Josephs, Dominic Bailey, Bryson Eason, those are players on the defensive line who are all SEC caliber. Jeremiah Talander and Arion Carter at linebacker. And then also on my All-SEC teams, I have Jermon McCoy, Ricky Gibson III, Colton Hood, and Boo Carter. That might be the deepest corner room in America, and it could also be the best overall in terms of starting capability. The defense, yet again, should be good. I think Heupel's a good coach, so I don't think they're going to implode. But this team with, plus, 250 odds to reach the playoffs, plus, around that 3,000 mark to win the SEC and the 8.5 win total, they have a very clear ceiling to them in my mind. And I'm picking for this season, tied for 4th in the SEC. I have a lot of teams going 5-3 in SEC play. I have them going 9-3 in the regular season, and then going to a bowl game, and probably a pretty nice bowl game. Chance to win 10 games in the bowl, or if you lose the bowl, you still win 9 games overall in an impressive conference to play in. The schedule matches up well enough with them to where I think they have a guaranteed, again, 7 wins. And they'll probably, whether it's, whether Vanderbilt or Oklahoma or Florida or Arkansas, Kentucky, some of those games that aren't guaranteed wins, because some of those teams will probably be better than I think they will be. I think they'll win some of those games because enough of them are at home, or Tennessee has enough roster talent that is superior to the roster talent on those squads to come out with a win. That's my Tennessee record prediction, and now I want to get to some more specific predictions that I have for the Volunteers. Let's go through this. I have a mild, medium, hot, scorching, and hellfire prediction based on the heat of said prediction, kind of using a Scoville scale analogy. My mild prediction is that Tennessee is a worse quality team in 2025 compared to 2024. That's the easiest prediction one could make for Tennessee, outside of the fact that they would drop off at defensive tackle or quarterback. Those are some of the easiest predictions one could make about Tennessee football in my mind. My medium prediction for them is that the rushing offense won't drop off much due to the talent in the backfield. Already mentioned this. I think that Peyton Lewis will be a good running back and that Deshaun Bishop will as well. That rotation will be used along with maybe someone that I don't quite know about or that you don't know about is a key player, and I think Tennessee will run the football well again. My hot prediction is that Tennessee will produce its worst offense under Josh Heupel with the quarterback change. It will not be a good offense. It won't. It'll be even worse than last year. And last year's offense was not all that impressive. It just was not. So that's just with the changes at wide receiver, and I actually think they'll get better there, but I think quarterback's going to get worse. O-line's a bit shaky, and the fact that they'll no longer have the caliber of defense they did last year with all they lost, it'll regress a little bit, means the offense won't have the same amount of chances to make mistakes or to get down the field, and they'll have less time to work with. So I think it will be Heupel's worst offense at Tennessee. My scorching prediction is that the Volunteers will win several nail-biters. So whether it's Syracuse in week 1, maybe Arkansas at home, Oklahoma at home, maybe Kentucky on the road, or at Florida or Vanderbilt, I think they're going to win some close games. I think that this team will play in more games in which they either lose or win close than win in dominant fashion. It's going to be an entertaining team to watch unless you're a Tennessee fan, which I think there will be several moments where you either want to turn off the TV or you think that your team is going to lose. And that's just because the defense is going to need some time to settle in. It'll be a good unit. But Tennessee has a lot of questions on offense, and they also have questions at special teams, too. And they play some tough competition. This leads me to my Hellfire prediction, where I have Tennessee going 9-3, but I don't think it'll be a good 9-3. I think there will be several teams with either similar losses or more losses, whether in terms of quality or quantity, that will be superior to Tennessee. I think that they lose to Georgia and Alabama each by 17 or more points. I think that Georgia that early in the year with the QB change, I think it's going to be a blowout. Georgia's going to go in there, and it's going to look like the 2023 game or the 2021 game. Not because Georgia is the caliber of team they were in 21 or even 23, because Tennessee is going to, they're not going to fit the identity of a Heupel team at all that early. Just with the QB change, the moves they had to make in the spring, and the fact that there is just enough of more unknown things to where I think it will be a bad loss. And it's the same thing for Alabama on the road. Alabama's going to want revenge. We all remember what happened to Tennessee in 2023, even 2021 when they had a really good offense, but Alabama's was just better. This Alabama team is a little bit more experienced than last year's, and I think they match up better with this Tennessee team because of, the environment change. It's being played in Tuscaloosa. It's not being played in Neyland. And also the fact that Tennessee loses a lot on the line of scrimmage and probably has a net negative there in that matchup. Alabama gets better on the line of scrimmage, or at least maintains it. I think Tennessee is going to get worse. And then Alabama will probably be a better passing team than they were last year, while Tennessee will be worse as well. Those games are just not good matchups at all, and I think those are close to guaranteed losses. But this Tennessee team, relative to what happened in the spring portal with Nico leaving and that being unexpected, and the fact that they have not recruited at the level of a Texas, a Georgia, and Alabama, they're clearly behind those. I think that Heupel will do a good job coaching and managing this roster. I think that with everything in consideration, 9-3, even with some of the conditions I provided, with some of those bad losses, would at least be a good coaching job. Maybe not one of the best coaching jobs in America, but close, I think, for sure. This will be a team that struggles in the big games, also struggles to escape in some of the smaller games, but I think in those smaller games, not against Alabama or Georgia, that I would favor Tennessee's coaching and I would favor their roster over the rosters and staffs of many of those other teams not named Alabama and Georgia. Florida on the road will be tough. Syracuse opening up, I think, will be tough, but Tennessee will find a way to win some football games this fall. Now we can talk about Texas. And then after that, if we have any time, I can get to some more questions. Okay. Anthony James Jr., thank you for the $2 super chat. Great work, Sam. Subscribe, y'all. Fight on. And fight on to you, Anthony James G. Thank you very much. I really appreciate the $2 super chat. We'll keep going. Nobody but Bama is underestimating Georgia. Texas certainly isn't. Texas did, though, end regulation time tied with Georgia in the SEC championship game, sending it to overtime. Texas has a shot at winning this year versus Georgia. Absolutely they do. Absolutely. I think Texas will be better than Georgia, just like they were last year per the power ratings. I just have a tough time seeing Steve Sarkisian win that. I have a tough time seeing him win that game, and I also think that Georgia had so much going wrong for them last year. There's a chance that they improve, and Texas loses as much as Georgia does. So, I mean, a lot more went right for Texas last year than it did for Georgia. Not a lot went right for Texas, honestly. They had their own health issues and injuries that were not timed in the ideal way, but everyone has to deal with that. I just think at the same time, while there's a chance that Texas separates from Georgia this year, there's also a chance that Georgia in the power ratings matches Texas entirely, where they were lagging a bit last year. And that plus the coaching advantage and hosting Texas, and then if they play again, it will be neutral field. That just makes me inclined to think that Georgia would beat Texas. And yeah, thank you for the support, everyone liking the video and subscribing. My apologies that this show has not been up to the standard that I hold, but it's the third show of the week. We're going to do another show tomorrow, and at least I've given you two predictions for two big teams, and honestly, fan bases in Georgia and Tennessee, and now as we talk about Texas, these are fan bases that I want to be more involved with the college football with Sam community. So let's get into it. I've talked about before how I believe Steve Sarkisian is the best roster builder in America. Better than Kirby Smart, better than Ryan Day, better than Dan Lanning. I truly believe that when looking at their recruiting, where they put their NIL. I mean, they put their their mouth where their money is, or money where their mouth is. I forget how the saying goes, but they match their commitments and promises with actions, and they're careful with what they promise. This is a tactical, smart, tough, committed, passionate operation that Steve Sarkisian and his staff are dedicated to. They went 13-3 last year, 7-1, and they finished atop the SEC, and in power ratings, they were the best SEC team. They just matched up with a Georgia team that, for whatever reason, on the 2 days they played was tougher than them, especially the first day, and therefore, instead of going 13-0, which was possible, they went 11-2 regular season. Then they beat Clemson at home. They beat Arizona State in the Peach Bowl, famed Peach Bowl. I think all Texas fans will forever remember 4th and 13 and the near choke job that occurred in the second half all at the same time. And then they played Ohio State very competitively in the Cotton Bowl. Just ended up losing that game because Ohio State was more experienced and Ohio State outcoached them. But it was a good season, and they followed up that 12-2 Big 12 championship caliber team with a 13-3 SEC championship caliber team. They didn't win the SEC as how Texas won the Big 12 the year prior, but they came close. To be 25-5 for the previous 2 years tells me that Texas football is back. They're back. They don't have to win a national championship to be back. I made this comment on Twitter, and people got very frustrated with me. I said that if you don't think Texas is back right now at 25-5, and in conference play in the Big 12 and the SEC being 15-2, if you don't think they're back, then Ohio State under Ryan Day was not elite and was not back from 2021 to 2023, or even 2024 up until they were able to hoist the national championship trophy. And people were saying, oh, well, given Ohio State's history, no, that's not how this works. Texas won a Power 4 conference in the Big 12 in 2023. Ohio State hasn't done that since 2020. Now, they did just win the title, and I'm not trying to discredit Ohio State and make Texas out to be the best program in America. Right now, Ohio State's a better program than they are. What I'm trying to say is Texas is back. The standard is to be back as a blue blood, to be competing for the national championship. They've done that for 2 years in a row. They've shown you that it's not a fluke. They, with this schedule, can easily go 12-0. They could also go 9-3 or 8-4. I think their more realistic floor is 9-3. But look at how they've recruited and how they've developed, and the fact that they've sent double-digit NFL draft picks back-to-back. And then by preseason projections, power ratings, the coaching job Sark has done every year, the management of the roster, the development, they're getting better and better and better. I mean, they're now producing at a caliber of clip that I think Georgia and Alabama were, where you're sending guys to the NFL and you're not returning a lot of production every year, and yet you are still getting towards the mountaintop and in range to be the mountaintop. I love Texas. I don't know if this team is going to win it all this year. I don't know if they'll win the SEC. I mean, heck, with how much they've lost, with the fact they got Ohio State on the road in week 1 along with an SEC schedule, there's a world where they don't reach the SEC championship game or they regress from last season. There's a world that's realistic. But I love their outlook. I do. And that's a complete 180 from where I was probably a year or two ago, or more 2 or 3 years ago. About a year or two ago, I understood that Texas, as long as Sark was there, was going to be in a good position. But with how they're recruiting and developing, and then what they did in the Cotton Bowl too was impressive. It was a loss, but many viewed that Ohio State team as operating at like a 2019 LSU clip, and then Texas almost beat them. And that was with Ohio State on fire in the playoffs and not having to play their starters for 2 games in a row because of how dominant they were for the entire first round game in Rose Bowl, of course. So a little bit of a long intro there, but I like where Texas is going. So that will be reflected in my record prediction a little bit. With all they lose, they only bring back 51% of their production. Ohio State week 1 on the road, San Jose State and UTEP week 2 and 3, bye in week 4. Week 5, they get Sam Houston at home. Week 6, they play at Florida. 7, they face Oklahoma neutral field, the Red River Shootout. Week 8 at Kentucky, 9 at Mississippi State. 10, they host Vanderbilt. Week 11 is a bye. Travel to Georgia week 12, host Arkansas week 13, host A&M week 14. From October 5th to October 31st, Texas football does not play in Austin. They don't play in Darrell K. Royal Stadium. They don't. That's crazy. That's just something to mention about their schedule. A lot of those teams on the schedule, I think, are very beatable for Texas. I think Texas is far superior to all of those teams roster-wise, but playing at home and balancing that with playing on the road matters, and the fact they don't play at home for that stretch, that is a little bit insane. I think they have the 14th toughest SEC conference schedule. Not very tough, but if you factor in the fact that they play Ohio State on the road, and then you have a road game against Florida. You play Oklahoma, neutral field. A&M, you host them. And then I don't even know why I didn't type Georgia in their toughest games. Georgia on the road's their toughest game, I think, by a good margin here. I love Texas, and I like where they're at, but there's just... Don't know why I had a brain freeze there. I'll edit that out. This is a team that is on the precipice of reloading and potentially improving from the prior season, even with all they lost. I mean, you got Arch Manning at quarterback on my All-SEC team. I think he'll be a top 10 QB this year. I have C.J. Baxter coming back and playing well. He's my best SEC running back in the preseason. Quintravion Wiesner and Jarrett Gibson are also represented on my larger-than-usual all-conference SEC team. I think that Texas's offensive line, got Cole Hudson at center, DJ Cambo and Neto Umeozulu at guard, and then Trevor Gooseby and Brandon Baker at tackle. It's going to be another good unit under Kyle Flood. Won't have the same talent it did last year, but it's still highly recruited, and Flood's one of the best recruiters and developers in the game on the O-line. Ryan Wingo, DeAndre Moore Jr., Kalik Lockett. Those are wide receivers on my All-SEC team. And then, of course, the incoming transfer tight end from Cal, Jack Endries. Cole Brevard, Travis Shaw, Murad Watson, Alex January, and Justice Terry are All-SEC defensive tackles. I have Colin Simmons and Ethan Burke and Colton Vasek there at edge. Anthony Hill Jr., Trey Moore, and Leona Lefu at linebacker. Michael Taft, Jelani McDonald at safety. And Jalen Gilbo, Kobe Black, and Malik Muhammad at corner. And also pay attention to incoming punter Jack Bomeister and kicker Mason Shipley, another incoming transfer. I think Texas has done a good job with their special teams units. It was one of their few questions last season. All of this leads me to pick Texas to essentially do what they did last season. Another 11-2 campaign, another campaign with 7 SEC wins and 1 loss. They'll be tied for first in the SEC. I have them as the SEC runner-ups yet again, once again losing to Georgia in Atlanta, and they'll participate in the CFP and definitely be in contention to receive a first-round bye with the resume they had. I mean, Texas under this year's format, if applied to the 2024 season, would have received a first-round bye. And their non-conference schedule at the end of the year was awful. I don't think Ohio State's going to regress anywhere close to the way Michigan did last year after their title game. And they have to play Georgia on the road, not at home. Florida should be better than last year. Oklahoma should be. They're facing a tougher schedule, Texas is, than 2024. So that, and then achieving the same record, tells me there's a pretty good chance this team will receive a first-round bye. And that will be impressive. It will absolutely be impressive. So there's that. And I think looking at their potential, again, they could go 12-0. They could also go 9-3. I think 11-1 is the most likely because they have better rosters than Ohio State and Georgia right now. They have better rosters than everyone on their schedule. So in a few of their tough games on the road, or maybe Oklahoma neutral field, if Texas is playing these teams competitively, they're going to wear these teams down. as long as they're within striking distance. And then with the special teams that they have, in theory, with Bouwmeester and Shipley coming in, they should be able to trade blows in the special teams game, whether that's, good punts that change and flip the field, or kicking field goals when you're holding your opponents to field goals or punts, but you can't exactly get in the end zone. And Texas has had that problem under Steve Sarkisian a lot, along with the third quarter collapses. That's their weakness. Third quarter collapse, struggling to score touchdowns in the red zone. I'm a Big Ten fan, actually a Michigan student. So the best analogy I can come up with is that Texas's offense under Sark has in a lot of ways been like Michigan's in 2022, where they're dominant and athletic and powerful and big and strong in a lot of ways. But when they get into the red zone, you do not know whether they're going to score a touchdown or have to kick a field goal. And last year, Auburn was no longer automatic, and that was a problem. So they will at least, I think, have a automatic presence inside the red zone at kicker. That, plus they're continuing to upgrade their talent roster, and Georgia and Ohio State, I think, will regress. I think they're going to regress more than Texas will in the meta of winning the national championship. I think that while Georgia won't regress as a team from 2024 to 2025 because a lot went wrong for them, I think they'll improve a little bit. Ohio State will certainly regress because they were just that much better than the rest of the field, and they lose a plethora of starters and have 2 coordinator changes. And Georgia has questions on O-line. They have questions at QB. Ohio State actually has questions at the same position, more so on the O-line, much less so than Georgia at quarterback. But they also have questions on the defensive line. Texas gets closer to these teams in terms of matching up with them, and I think they've surpassed these teams in terms of having the build and fulfilling the meta to win a national championship. So that's why I side with them going 11-1 instead of 10-2, despite having a tougher schedule and losing as much as they do. Predicting Texas in a more specific manner, having a few predictions, some milder and some hotter than others. I have a mild, medium, hot, and scorching prediction along with a hellfire one using a Scoville scale. I think that the Longhorns finally have the talent to reload despite losing 12 NFL draft picks. That's my mild prediction. My medium prediction is that Texas fields a top 2 defense with the best pass rush in America. My hot prediction is that Sarkisian brings Texas back to the college football playoff semifinals. It's not just back to the playoffs, not advancing to the quarterfinals. I think they're going to at least go to the semifinals. My scorching prediction is that the offensive line reloads, and by the end of the year, it's a top 10 unit. That's scorching because good offensive linemen, are in short supply. I think that in terms of fielding good offensive lines, it's never been more cyclical. You don't have the depth anymore with the portal and with NIL and more schools being able to get top-tier talent. It's hard. And yet Texas has been able to barely use the portal. In fact, none of their current starting offensive linemen were portal players. All of them have been at Texas their entire career. That, along with the supporting cast they have, along with Kyle Flood being their O-line coach and how he's recruited and developed, I think, despite losing 4 starters, this unit is going to be really, really good. And it's all about Kyle Flood having that continuity, the fact that they're not relying on the portal, the fact that, they've reloaded before there, and they've reloaded, Texas has before just in general. They didn't return a lot entering last season, yet they were the same or better quality team than they were in 2023, and certainly not worse. My hellfire prediction is perhaps the only one that's maybe a little bit negative towards Texas. And I don't even think this is that bold. I'm putting it as hellfire, though, because the national media would certainly think it's bold. I think Manning will be elite. I'm inclined to say top 10. Notice how I said top 10 earlier. But I don't think he'll be generational. And some points I have to support that are the fact that he was the first SEC quarterback since Kentucky had a converted wide receiver starting there, Lynn Bowen. He's the first SEC QB since Lynn Bowen to, I forget what the percentage is, but he created like half of his pressures on his own, essentially running into defenders, and his pocket presence was not the greatest, to say the least. You saw moments of generational upside, but you also saw absolute lows, like that first Georgia game. And he had some turnover-prone moments. So I think that, along with the fact that, look, so we've seen Sark and what he's done. And while I think Sark's a great offensive play caller, I think that there are some consistent limitations within his system. We've seen from Ewers 2 years in a row where he is not a consistent top 10 QB. And Ewers was starting ahead of Manning. Now, I think a lot of that had to do with Ewers' experience in Sark's system, and that takes time. And sometimes the more talented guy at the time isn't the smarter player. He has more learning to do. He has more knowledge to gain. I think Manning's going to be ready. I think Manning's going to be really good. Really do believe that. But I also think that in watching Steve Sarkisian and his quarterbacks, mostly Ewers, I don't think he'll be generational in year one. Now, year two, and I'm inclined to think he comes back for 2026, because I think unless he's guaranteed to go round one, pick one, there's always more he can get because he has that generational potential. I don't think he'll be generational this year. And given what Paul Feinbaum has said, what others, even people I trust, have told me, that is definitely a bold prediction nationally. From my perspective, I just kind of think to myself, well, I'm not insulting the guy. I think he's going to be one of the best QBs in the country. And by the end of the year, maybe he'll be top 5 at that point. But as an overall all-year resume, I don't think that he will be generational. I don't. This will still be one of the best teams in America. They'll at least get to the semifinals. I would give them I'd give them at least top 4 odds to win it all. I know them, Ohio State, and Georgia are up there. Still think Clemson and Penn State are a little bit too low in odds, but in a field that's wide open, that's very competitive by preseason odds, I would give Texas better odds than most teams. The only teams I'd consider giving better odds to are Clemson and Penn State, really. I think Georgia could be tied with Texas, same with Ohio State, but I don't think they could have better odds. I think Texas right now is a better roster build than those two. Ohio State and Georgia just might compensate for it by, for now, having better head coaches. This will be a fun team to watch, and they'll have one of the best defenses in America. That's absolutely for sure. It'll be guaranteed a top 2 unit, and it may not be number 2. Well, at least guaranteed top 3. Let me walk that back. Guaranteed top 3 could be number 1. From the preseason, they should be the favorites to be number 1, along with maybe Penn State. Okay, I do not have more time. I hate to say it. I don't have more time, guys. I just don't. I hate it, but it's the reality. So I'm going to go live tomorrow. There was a lot more I wanted to get to this week that I just wasn't able to due to time restrictions. But this will be all for today. The SEC prediction videos will be up tomorrow. I might just, sometime, I don't know. Yeah, not the greatest day, but we got, Tennessee, Georgia, Texas record predictions done. I will answer my questions. Normally today's Withdrawal Wednesday, but tomorrow will be a Withdrawal Tuesday. I'll answer the questions tomorrow. I'll do that. And then we'll be back. Yeah, we'll be back then. Friday and Saturday we won't be live. Sunday we'll be live, though. And depending on how Sunday is, we may have a pretty massive show on Sunday. We'll probably have 2... Yeah. We'll probably have 2 big shows next week. So 2 shows that'll be 2 hours or more. This week we had a lot of shorter shows, but that's okay. Tomorrow we'll cover 10 topics, if not more than that. It'll be a pretty big show for sure. And then we have some more stuff that isn't only live, like my college football playoff predictions. Those are coming this weekend. So you'll get to see my full bracket, how I think it'll play out. I might even play with it a bit and do some brackets for fun in that video that are brackets that aren't my main one, but if I had to take one or two teams out, who would I, substitute in as the next most likely from my perspective? Thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you guys very soon. Have a fantastic day.